we've learned a little bit there about the what mobile research nursing is, but can we delve a little bit into why this is particularly so exciting for rare disease? Ellen, why do clinical trials in rare disease differ from other clinical trials? What are the sort of the nuances that are very unique to this population?
That's an excellent question. And from the very moment that we are contacted by a sponsor or a CRO to discuss a future trial, one of the first questions I ask is, what is the therapeutic area, the indication, and do you consider this a rare or even an ultra rare disease? Because from that moment, everything about our approach to this project takes a different road, because we understand these patients are likely to be maybe further along in a patient journey that has already been exhausting and trying and vexing to this family. We need to minimize the amount of disruption to whatever their routine may be. I don't dare to presume to call it their normal routines, because most families who struggle with rare disease aspire to use a normal routine. Their lives just don't look like everyone else's because they have so very many challenges. So these patients that we see are often fragile or immobile, or may have really disruptive psychosocial behaviors that make packing them up, dressing them up, taking them out, traveling with them and going to a site. By the time they get to Dr. Irving, these patients might be really agitated, uncomfortable, hungry, and every other kind of not able to pay attention or focus, and crying, she says, yes. So if we can manage that visit maybe before or after that child's daytime routine. Often we're requested by parents in orphan diseases with the littles, can you maybe come between dinner and bath time? Because that bedtime routine is sacred, and it has to go exactly in a certain order. And water for so many human beings, and certainly in some indications, is a real touchstone for comfort and relaxation, that if we can have them with a full belly and maybe mom and dad and all of their loved ones around, and then we're going to go into this intense activity, and then have that cleansing moment of that bath time and a little exhale by our littles that says, okay, now we're back on routine. I'm in my bath. This is my happy place. So, we do try to work into the routine of the family to do this at the least disruptive and most comfortable time for patient and parents, caregivers. So the needs are greater in a rare and certainly in ultra rare disease that we understand from the moment that we begin talking. We go and do our own little research off to the side. So what are some of the markers of this indication, and what might we be expecting, and how can we be particularly and highly sensitive to what this patient and their family may be looking for from us? So
that's actually incredible to hear that you're working into that level of detail of really understanding that individual's case. I mean, that really is game changing, isn't it, to be so tailored to the individual's situation like that. And I guess as well, from a rare disease point of view, often these families are coming to you having been through a really protracted diagnostic odyssey. So the level of frustration can be generally quite high with the systems in any way. So you're already dealing with people at that kind of heightened state of frustration and perhaps a bit of discord. Is that something that you see, Melita, that there's that sort of level already within people of frustration and maybe a bit of distrust of processes?
Yes, and with trials, the last thing we want to do is annoy people and for them to say, oh, that's it, I'm not going to do this. It's just not worth the while. So to be able to do something, and that is a really impressive bespoke service that you've just described there, Ellen. I love that too. And yeah, to be able to fit into people's lives and to minimize the disruption, to really encourage them to keep taking part in the trials and get to the end. Of course, we must do everything that we can. So yeah, that does resonate with me, trying to minimize the disruption off the back of what is probably a very draining experience that they've been through already.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephanie, can I come to you? What is the specific approach that you would take when building a clinical trial for rare disease specifically?
Sure. So when building a clinical trial for rare disease, we want to look at how we can make that burden as minimal as possible for the participant and for their family, and seeing what we could outsource to mobile visits. And so there are certain things that we look for when trying to operationalize, making sure that it's within a clinician's scope of practice that we can send into the home, making sure it's able to be done with portable equipment, and making sure that it's of an acceptable safety risk to be done in a mobile environment. So we're certainly not going to take the MRIs away from the site, but if we can do the safety laboratory draws that may be required every 2 days, if we can take that so that that can be brought to the participant, we're looking at everything that can be a little bit more flexible to ensure that participant retention and ensure that it's as easy as possible for those families.
And if we look at the sort of practicalities around that, what are the specific operational challenges for you and for the investigators when you're actually building this and actually trying to make this happen, and for the nurses?
Sure. So there are certainly some operational obstacles that we work through. Most notably, I would say adapting laboratory processing for a mobile setting is a little bit difficult. You can't bring a refrigerated centrifuge to a mobile visit. That is something that's usually about 400 pounds. And so our nurses are not carrying that into a participant's home. And so we have workarounds with that processing, and we work through that with the laboratory personnel to ensure that it's not at all compromising the data, and that it is still being processed in a manner that it won't show up to the central lab penalized or anything like that, so that they can still run through that and it's not adding any additional burden on that participant.
Do you, out of interest, have any kind of feelings, is there ever a time when people say, actually, I don't want this because I don't want my home to become kind of medicalized and to become a site like that. I want that to be my safe haven. Are there families that feel very much that there is a boundary and they don't want to bring it into the home?
Yes, so I see Ellen getting certainly excited about that. And Ellen, feel free to jump in. We do certainly see some hesitation with that. And we try to really have our nurses coached to assure the participants that we are not setting up a whole clinical site in your home. We are ensuring that we are bringing exactly what we need, not more, and that we are cleaning up appropriately and making so we're not invading your space, but just facilitating having this in your home. Ellen, is there anything you would add to that?
Sure. I'll use a real world example of a trial in adolescent autism, and it required injections. And these were adolescents, which I know Dr. Irving can attest, they're feeling their oats, wanting to express a little independence. And these were going to be uncomfortable injections. They were not an easy stick. And it was the request of the parents that these visits not happen at home, but perhaps at school, if at all possible, because it was at school that these children who were on a very specific, and in autism, very ordered routine, it was where the children expected and had been conditioned to accept challenge. Wasn't that an interesting perspective? Yeah. Because that's where new foods were introduced, new ideas, new concepts, and maybe changing behavior. So let's keep home and mom and dad as a safe space. But perhaps it's at school where they had an army of aides and other kinds of support where they were expecting challenge, that we would introduce something challenging. And it sounds like such a simple idea, but it just, came right at us. And parents know their kids better than anyone. So we thought that was a great suggestion, and it was practical to implement.
That's really interesting. So actually, that's an important point to bring out, that actually mobile nursing doesn't necessarily mean home nursing. There are other sites, school. Does that also extend to work? Are there people that might choose to have this in the workplace to limit impact, or is that less?
To work, and one that we don't see infrequently for families challenged by disease, Disney World. We can follow a family on vacation.
Seems like it would be a lot more palatable if you were at Disney World.
At your vacation destination, when families on holiday, there's no reason that they are holidaying from their treatment path or their trials. So we're always amused and a little bit challenged by where we are asked to go. About 90% of the time it's at home, but that other 10% is office, school, vacation destination. Some families migrate away from the cold weather every winter, and we follow what we call the snowbirds.
Wow. So I guess this goes back to you, Stephanie, in terms of this logistical piece of the puzzle and really making sure that these operational challenges can be overcome in an ever-evolving situation.
Yes, absolutely. And our project management team works closely with the sites, as well as our nurses who are working directly with those participants to ensure that we are as aware as possible of when they're planning to migrate, and so that we can be prepared and identify a clinician in that area. Certainly there are the last minute changes, and we're flexible to work with that too. Our primary goal is ensuring that we are easing the burden on these participants and these sites and bringing these visits to them. And so we will work around all the logistical challenges that we have to.
And just building on that, Melita, from a trial sponsor point of view, what can they do to help alleviate the burden on patients? You started off by talking about some of those burdens. What do you think the trial sponsors can do to help with that?
Well, thing number one is that they should engage with the people that they're trying to help right from the outset, I think, across many different levels. So I've already mentioned the primary endpoint. I think the primary endpoint can be different for clinicians, different for sponsors, different for regulators, different for families. And I think there probably is a compromise for everyone to be satisfied with what's chosen ultimately. But I think in terms of reducing that burden, increasing, improving recruitment rates and maintaining accrual, I think engaging families and people who are taking part in the trials right from the outset in designing the protocol is absolutely key. And I guess that's where you guys come in as well, to be able to have your say and to influence the protocol, and to be able to offer what you do offer. I think would be a great improvement in how trials are run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to that a little bit later on as well. And also that the discussion of outcomes, because I think that's a really important topic to touch on. But if we go back a little bit to that sort of success and adherence, Ellen, that you were talking about, do you feel that this model, and you've mentioned this about going into schools, maybe being something that can help with the compliance, I guess, with some of the measures, do you feel that this approach does make a difference to the success of the trial and to the adherence of these protocols?
Oh, I think very much so. I have been in and around home visits now more than a decade, which I find hard to believe. I'm half as old as our industry, and it has morphed and changed in acceptance over time. It really goes in waves. Of course, everybody got super engaged and interested in this on March 13th, 2020, when, the pandemic was declared. But interest has been high really ever since. I don't think we're going to go back to what it was before, of just thinking, yeah, once in a while, why not? But I think most sponsors take into account that the patient family must be considered, because patients have a choice of whether to participate or not. Does that answer your question? Are you looking for?
Yeah, and I'd like to expand on the topic of the pandemic a little bit there. Do you think that has reframed people, patients and the system's kind of appetite for this? Do you think that has made a difference, and that people are thinking about this in a different way than perhaps they might have done 5 years ago?
Oh, very much so. We were always a busy place. There were a number of very forward-looking sponsors who have incorporated this into their rare disease programs from the get-go. I'm thinking of one customer in particular. We've been involved granularly on a daily basis for more than 13 years. They showed that commitment early. They were joined by many, many others in 2020. We know it is a commitment to planning, to hearing the voice of the patient and their family. We also know it requires a little bit more as far as organization and monitoring and everything else. So I don't think we'll retreat back to what I call the before days, before the pandemic, but there's certainly more people interested in what we are now calling decentralized clinical trials, be it service in the home, service in the community, maybe at a chemist that's in the same small town. It's perhaps possible that blood sampling is happening in a variety of ways. There are many devices for microsampling. It continues to change on a daily basis, but it, I think, begins and ends with physicians like Dr. Irving
Yeah.
who advise their patients that this is maybe a path worth considering.
So Melita, you have a really interesting perspective, because obviously you bridge the research, but also, you know, you're seeing patients in clinical settings. Do you feel that they feel that there's enough information? Are they informed enough about what it would mean to take part in a clinical trial generally, and also what their options might be in terms of decentralized trials? And what that impact is on the family, you know, in terms of, because it's not just the patient, is it? It's the whole family. Do you feel there's enough information? They feel.
I don't think there is at the moment. I think the main problem is that there aren't, I mean, there are 10,000 rare diseases. There are not 10,000 treatments or trials.
Yeah.
But it's a really encouraging time at the moment, because there's a lot of focus on rare diseases, a lot of focus on how to increase the accessibility to clinical trials and innovative treatments. And how we do that is going to require all hands on deck. So I think it's time to step up and to increase what we can offer families and patients with rare diseases. And this I think really should be part of that clinical trial offering, especially if we're going to be really increasing what we do, increasing the volume of trials. They won't be accommodated at the institutions that they are currently expected to be accommodated at. So we need to think of very clever alternative solutions, and that is decentralization and mobile trial visits.
And who needs to drive that information? So if there's a lack of information, who should be driving creating those resources and getting that information out there?
Rare Revolution?
Challenge accepted.
All of us, I think.
You.
No, all of us, I think.
Yeah.
Sponsors.
Collective responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, collective responsibility. And I think increasingly, I keep referring to power of the patient and power of the family. I think people should be demanding to know about alternative ways of trials being delivered, and being upskilled themselves to say, great sponsor that you are, we hear that you have this in your pipeline. Would like to say, when you engage us at that very early stage, we'd like to consider alternative ways to deliver that trial, and part of that should be mobile.
And are you seeing that as a clinician? Are you seeing, because we know for sure there's a movement of more kind of professionalized patients and more informed expert patients, but are you seeing that clinically, that people are coming in and saying, I've heard about this, I want to know about this trial, you're working on this, is there more impetus coming from the patient side? Definitely.
And one thing that I've really noticed as well is that people will say to me at the point of diagnosis, oh, well, tell me what who I should contact, who I should find out some more about this, where are the support groups? And I say, well, this is so rare that there isn't anything. And then they'll come back in a year's time and say, Melita. So if one family came back with, Melita, look at this tattoo, and they've got a tattoo on their arm. It was the tattoo that they designed for the support group that they had founded.
Amazing.
So people are being really proactive. They can use social media, they can use all sorts of different, they can use the skills that they have in their everyday lives and their occupational lives, and apply that to improving knowledge and getting together with other families, really kind of that collective power to drive agendas forward to make things better for their children.